Serious, campers of Reddit, what is the creepiest, strangest, or straight up scariest thing you've experienced while camping in the woods? Oh, camping one night on the Yorkshire Dales, 2 a.m., heard a scratching sound. Instantly wide awake, scratching gets louder. Too dark to see anything, side of tent starts bulging inwards. Now a loud scraping sound. Side of tent almost touching the floor, pointy object pushing into the tent, leapt up, freaking out, unzipped tent door, expecting serial killer. Sheep had fallen asleep on the tent. I was maybe 13, and at a camp where we all would sleep in platform tents. There was one night where I woke up standing barefoot in the middle of the forest. I realized after a few minutes that I had been sleepwalking. After the panic of WTF just happened, I managed to see some lights off in the distance and get back to my tent. But who knows, it still could have been aliens. Not camping, but I woke up lying on the bathroom floor recently, with no clue where the hell I was or how I got there. It was freaky as hell, but I was so oddly calm. After a minute or two, it slowly came back to me. I just finished shaving, and the razors I had bought were cheap and crappy. Tore my face up bad. After, I put on some aftershave, and that's when it really dawned on me how badly I'd nicked myself. It hurt so bad, I literally passed out from the pain. So freaky, and that was in my own house. Can't imagine in the middle of a forest. I was in my sleeping bag trying to sleep and heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming toward me, so I turned on my flashlight and saw nothing. I settled back down and the footsteps started up again, and when they were about 20 feet away I turned on the flashlight, and saw nothing, so I got my revolver out of my pack and waited. They started up again. The crunching sound in the leaves coming straight for me. Crunch, crunch. And when it was about 5 feet away I turned my light on again and found myself facing down with a .38, a tiny little toad that was trying to reach the stream I was camping near. The sound was it hopping through the leaves. Back in high school, I was running on a trail through the woods and heard something behind me. When I turned around, a huge black bear was right behind me, standing a few feet off the side of the trail. I must have come within a few feet of it without even realizing. Was working in a summer camp, and one day when we were on minimal staff I happened to be the person in camp. Cell phone reception was terrible up in the mountains, so I had gone to one of the cabins to use a landline and chat after work. Heading back to my cabin at the end of twilight, I get to the flagpole and there's a large black bear. It's heading past the swimming pool making a beeline for the dumpster. I stop in my tracks, thinking oh crap, hey bear. Bear stops and looks at me. Could swear it was thinking oh crap, hey human. So the two of us face off for a few seconds. Either my flashlight made its eyes sting or the bear realized my scent was all over the place. It made a right turn and ambled up the slope into the wilderness. That bear still returned on a regular basis to tip over the dumpster in hopes of getting a snack, which never succeeded because we used bear bars. So each morning one of the chores was to lift up the dumpster and see where the tracks had come from. This scared the shit out of the kids. I ended up with the most badass reputation in camp because every little kid soon found out that I had faced the bear alone. No kid talked back at me. The one occasion when one tried, another kid stopped it by exclaiming, "That's the bear lady." Can't say I was sorry that reputation happened. Discipline was easier. Especially when people noticed that when I changed cabins the bear changed its route through the camp to avoid me. After it retreated once, its instinct thought of me as dominant, so it didn't want another conflict. All because I had stood there like an idiot holding a flashlight at a bear. Better decision than flying into a panic, as things turned out. I was stalked for almost 15 kilometers by a black bear with mange on the Mattagami River in northern Ontario. It really made a mess of my usually pretty level head. Being in a pretty significant state of exhaustion by that point in the trip, my brain saw a giant chupacabra and it took a while for me to calm down and figure out what that was. Got out of the tent to pee at night, walked away a bit, scanned with my headlamp, and saw the glowing eyes of a mountain lion that was sizing me up. My tent being surrounded by mountain goat and all of them trying to nudge their way in the tent forcefully, so I had to act like I was just an object so they wouldn't do anything to harm me. Once when I was camping with my family we heard gunshots. We ran back to the tent to find it practically shredded with bullets. P.S. It was a no hunting area. Ever hear a panther scream? Yeah, that during night in pitch black woods. Pretty bone chilling, but there was also this other scary experience. Me, My mother and my aunt were out in the woods at night looking for our horses who had escaped across the fence, and we all felt like something was watching us. We smelt this really strong scent of musk and kinda like wet hair. It definitely seemed like something really big by the power of the scent. My mom claims Bigfoot, haha. Stayed at a cabin in the North Georgia mountains when me and my wife were still dating. Her name is used in a scary movie where people wearing creepy masks knock at the door and ask if so-and-so is home. So trying to be macho and naturally say that casually earlier in the night to freak her out, so she'll snuggle up and get closer to me at night. So it's about 2 a.m. and we're up talking and messing around, when the door swings open. My wife, scared from my earlier comment, swears up and down she locked the door earlier. She has no crap OCD, so I'm sure she did. Me trying to act casual say maybe she didn't know biggie. About 2 minutes later we hear footsteps and laughter on the side of the cabin, followed immediately by a knock on the door. Had to clear the immediate area outside using a pistol I had brought with us. I acted cool but would have shit my pants and probably shot myself if a mouse ran by. Luckily nothing was there and it was our last night. Still freaks me out to this day. About 18 years ago I was backpacking alone in desolation wilderness in Tahoe. When I got back to civilization and had my photos developed, there was a picture of me sleeping. I used to run a Cub Scout pack years ago, and one weekend we were camping at a Scout Association campsite. At about 2 a.m. on the Saturday morning I was woken by one of the boys screaming. It was really loud, really terrified screaming. I crashed out of my tent, and as I ran to where the boys' tent were, a row of dome tents with 4 boys in each, the screaming stopped. I was looking for a tiger or something dragging a Cub Scout out and devouring him. Not that we get tigers in southeast London. The screaming had been that terrible, but there was just silence. No other kids had woken up, but I'd been joined by the other 2 leaders, equally worried and mystified. I couldn't believe that the other boys hadn't woken up or that there wasn't anyone crying. Just silence. We still had the same number of boys in the morning. It didn't happen again, and we never did find out who it was or what was up. Edit. Just to clear up any confusion, it was definitely a human voice, not an animal, as the boy screamed various words including mummy just before going quiet. And there are no bobcats, mountain lions, cougars, bears or anything scarier than a fox in southeast London. Woke up to find a bear literally standing over me. I'm English, I'd never seen a bear before. I was cowboy camping in just a sleeping bag in Lake Tahoe. I froze, then closed my eyes and feigned sleep, and it wandered off. Crossed paths with wolves, a pack of 10. They got off the trail after staring at us for about 40 seconds. I looked over my shoulder the rest of the trip, not like it would really do anything. Camping in the woods, family asleep in the tent. I'm sitting by the campfire getting drunk. I keep hearing things hitting the ground and leaves rustling near me. They were big thuds, so it wasn't leaves, sticks or seeds. This went on for a long time. I was in an isolated place and there was no one else around. It was like someone was throwing large rocks or something. In the morning, I went to the area of the noise to check it out. It was a walnut tree. Walnuts have a husk around them and are about the size of an apple. It was the end of summer, so they were falling out of the tree. I was tent camping with some friends in a relatively remote location. We all went to sleep around 11 p.m. Woke up the next morning and all the trees behind our tents, starting around 100 feet away, were torn down. Checked the weather later and a freak tornado was reported to have popped up overnight. We just got lucky it bounced when it did, or it would have taken us with it. I don't know if I camp enough to answer this, or if it's the strange that you're looking for, but one year my friend invited me to stay up in the woods at this old campsite he went to every year with his family. It was fun, we fished and went swimming and everything, and one night we had this little bonfire and made s'mores. Camping stuff, but then, at 2 in the morning, someone whistled the Hunger Games call. Me, being an avid whistler, one of my few skills, whistled the return call. They did it again. I did it again. The campsite had maybe 40 people in it and everyone was intense except me and my friend, and the whistler, so this went on for about 5 minutes and the whistles devolved into random notes and counter melodies until I got fed up and decided to find them, so I stood up and walked into the forest. Barefoot. No flashlight. A total fool. Now, I didn't want to call out to them, because that would be too easy, so instead I slunk through the forest quietly, trying to hone in on their whistle. It took about 20 minutes before my friend realized we were going too far away from camp and should head back, but I had to freaking find them. A couple of minutes later we reached a little clearing. There was a cliff that ran down into the lake and a couple of trees that had fallen over, and there were 3 kids just sitting out looking to the lake. I called to them, saying that I'd been looking for them and how fun the whistling was, and who they were, but they didn't respond. They just sat there and looked at the lake. It was positively eerie, and they didn't even seem to hear me. I didn't get any closer to them than a couple of feet. I didn't want to spook them and have them demon throw me over the cliff or something. As soon as we got back to our campsite there was no more whistling. Very creepy. In the morning I asked people if they had heard us and they said no, so I guess everyone is just a super heavy sleeper or something. Probably going back though. When I first went camping with my now wife, she was smart and I was dumb. Honestly, I'm still pretty dumb at camping. Anyway, it's 3 in the morning, I hear these skittering sounds and I get ready to fight off a coyote or two while my wife gets safely into the car. I spend a minute psyching myself up. Alright, let's do this. I jump out with a flashlight, and it's 2 raccoons playing with garbage. Ugh. My wife, dog and myself, second day of an 80 kilometers hike in northern Ontario. Killarney Provincial Park. Set up camp on a point, 750 meters, into a lake. One way onto the point and one way off the point. We were hearing wolves since about 9 p.m., went to bed by 10 and the howls were getting closer and closer. Then one howled from right behind us on the trail down to the point. I got out of the tent and started making lots of noise trying to scare it off. This usually works for bears whom we have had lots of encounters with. I didn't see anything there and didn't hear anything either. Went back to bed and laid down, trying to act confident as to not upset my wife. That when we both heard something outside of the tent. My dog was crazy quiet but shaking. I opened the tent to find a wolf staring at me from about 15 feet away. I grabbed the bear spray and took aim. I didn't use it but I again started screaming at the wolf and took a few charges towards it. Again, this usually works when faced with a black bear if you have no escape. The wolf didn't really care that I was there yelling at it. It kind of hung out for a few seconds then kind of very casually walked into the tree line just far enough that I couldn't see it anymore. I built a fire between the tent and the bush, sat up all night, kept my headlamp on all night. Had to listen to 3 or 4 wolves howl to each other all night about every 20 minutes. They were very close. The one I would estimate to be within 50 yards. I was sure they were going to come and grab my dog. At about 6 a.m. a bunch of them started howling altogether, way more than during the night, but it sounded like 8 to 10 wolves. We waited until about 8 a.m. then packed up and got the FK out of there. We were 36 kilometers in. Took us 2 days to hike in. We hiked out in 6.5 hours. About 1.5 hours into our hike out the wolves started howling behind us again. They were following us out. On the hike out we saw a bear with 2 cubs. This would usually concern us a bit but we were just like, get the FK out of my way. My wife lost all her toenails from the hike. And my poor dog got some serious anxiety about being in the tent. While settling in at Sandy Balls as part of my Duke of Edinburgh award, we started hearing noises of bikers coming down the path. Now, we were at the bottom of the campsite. This place is a luxury site, and they didn't really want a bunch of grubby 16-year-olds, so we were camping right at the bottom of a hill. It was a dead end, it led to nothing but cow pastures. We'd broken the Duke of Edinburgh rules earlier and headed up to the main facility to enjoy the bar, and watch the World Cup. I remember Croatia beating someone famous 3-1 if that dates it. A guy called Jarny scored, and we stumbled back to our tent. By this point it was dark. So we shut up shop and called it a night, 3 in their private luxury tent, and 3 in the pauper, for example, school equipment, tent. For the first hour, we kept hearing a cyclist. No lights. No other noise. But a cyclist, coming down the path, riding, tinkling the bell. Then silence. And this happened. Several times. Each from the same direction, never any return noise. In the morning we got up, looked around. There was nothing. The place was a dead end. There was nowhere for a cyclist to go. We were a little creeped out by the phantom noises, so we headed off to the creepy abandoned fireplace that was our next waypoint. Got stuck in mud, chased by a cow, trapped at a ford, then ended up at a Canadian War Memorial before we were picked up. While I was camping on a peninsula in Florida, I awoke to the sound of snorting and heavy breathing. It was quiet for a moment, but it started up again. Turns out, there was a few wild boars right outside my tent, sniffing around and making a ton of noise. I don't think I was in any danger, but that shit freaked me out. I went on a 16-mile hike in Arizona and climbed up a pretty easy hill. I think it was 8,000 to the top and not that much gain to get there. Rookie move, I didn't have enough water for the dry altitude and my meals were freeze-dried. I hiked to the top and got there as the sun was going down. I checked my water and split some between my dog and I, then set up a quick camp near a log with just a small hobo fire and a place to get some sleep so I could hike back in the morning. It was a day hike gone bad, because I didn't want to be hungry, thirsty and wandering around in the dark because it was completely new to me. I had never been there before. About 10 p.m. when it's pitch black, I hear something rustling around and making low noises, getting closer, making more grunts and shuffling noises and scaring the shit out of me. I had a more knife on me, but I was still pretty scared. That's not much protection. I'm not Daniel Boone and now terrified thinking it was a Bigfoot or a bear or something. I started freaking a little bit. Mountain lions don't make noise like that. My dog was staring intently in its direction with his ears up as it got closer and closer, louder and louder. As soon as it got about 10 to 15 away, I couldn't see because there wasn't a moon. My dog finally did his job and got up and started barking like crazy, and then the beast let out a huge squeal and ran away. It was just a stupid javelina that I was terrified of and stole my man card for a little bit. Ha! This was years and years ago when I was just getting back into hiking, and now I always have enough water and plan my hikes accordingly. My vicious dog is now 13 and no more hikes, but he does still guard against the vacuum. My family owns acreage in the middle of nowhere, so we've created a family camp of sorts. I was sitting around the fire, finishing my beer, and the rest of the family was asleep. It was about 1 to 2 a.m. The only light was from the stars and the fire, and the only sound was the crackling of said fire. Suddenly, I get that feeling that I'm being watched. There's woods surrounding the camp area and they're obviously pitch black. This unsettling feeling won't leave me, so I stand up to go to the cabin. As I turn, I see a huge dog standing less than a foot from where I was sitting, just staring at me. I never heard him approach, breathing, nothing. He looked like one of those hunting dogs, black with gray spots on the back. My heart jumped and I about shat myself, but he just sniffed the air then returned to the woods. I've never seen him since, nor has any of my family members. Scared the shit out of me. 9 years ago I was camping in northern BC with a group of friends. It was around 10 p.m. and we were in the middle of nowhere, roughly 50 kilometers from any town/store etc., so it was super dark out. We were sitting around our fire and just listening to tunes and drinking beers etc. At one point we see a light up on the mountain across the lake from us. This was a decent sized lake, I'd say roughly 5 kilometers across, surrounded by mountains. So as we noticed the light, assuming that it's other campers that we could visit with, we flashed our flashlight at them, attempting to get their attention. First we flashed our light twice, and they flashed back at us twice. Then 3 times. We were brainstorming going for a hike to go meet them when the light seemed to increase in intensity, then proceed to fly from one side of the massive mountain to a mountain on the other side of the lake. It then sat there and flashed at us a few times, but we turned off our light and at this point were shitting bricks. I remember just going into my tent and putting my sleeping bag over my head out of fear. I fell asleep and woke up and everything was fine, but for some reason there was roughly half a dozen dead really big toads outside my tent. Still wonder to this day what the heck happened. Nor really that creepy or scary, but I give my dad serious props for this one time. He was camping with my mom, brother, and I. My brother and I were pretty young, so we all shared one big tent. At night something was scratching at the tent and sniffing. Then it went to our picnic table and started eating something. My mom was freaked out. My dad got up and opened the tent, saw the bear a few feet away, then got back in without it seeing him. He told my mom it was a raccoon, knowing that the bear would leave after eating and my mom would only freak out knowing it was a bear. Back when I was a counselor in training, we had to do a one-night solo where you basically survive on your own for a night. I had borrowed a hammock from a friend in preparation. Everything was fine for most of the day. Went to bed in the hammock when it got dark. Woke up at some point in the middle of the night because I heard a sound. Something was right next to me. I had no flashlight or tools of any kind and the nearest person was maybe 3 kilometers away. I lay there in silence for what felt like a year. Then, all of a sudden I hear this shriek right next to my hammock and I swear my heart almost exploded out of my chest. It was a wild turkey. Some buddies and I went camping by the lake one night. About 1:30 a.m., we heard some rustling in the bushes and just figured it was a rabbit or something. Went over to check it out, found nothing. About 1:35 a.m., a huge pickup truck that was lifted and blaring loud music drove by, on a dirt road, really slowly, shining a huge police-grade spotlight on me and my friends. The truck burned out and kept driving, so my best friend and I decide to drive up the road and see if we spot anything unusual about the truck. We get to the main road, and there are probably 7 or 8 cop cars, lights flashing, and 2 or 3 ambulances. We stop to turn around and, I swear, like a horror film, a cop pecks on my window with his flashlight out of nowhere. He asks what we're doing. We told him we were camping and told him about the truck. He says, "Well, you boys might want to camp somewhere else. We had a homicide here and haven't located the suspect." Friend says, "So should we be scared?" Like a idiot, and the cop says, and I quote, "Well, I'm not scared, but there are 20 officers here and we all have guns." I said, "Yes sir," and tore off back down to the campsite. Best friend called the rest of our buddies and told them to pack up the gear, not to ask questions, and that we had to get out. We literally threw 2 fully pitched tents in the back of one of our trucks and got the hell out of there. The cops located the killer about 30 minutes later. At our campsite. I was 13 at my grandfather's hunting camp. My uncle had just bought a new hunting camera and wanted to test it out, so he set it up out in the woods. I got the brilliant idea to go up in the woods with my 2 other cousins and moon it, so when he checked the card, instead of wildlife, he would have seen some lovely butt cheeks. Hilarious to a 13-year-old's mind, and after some convincing my other 2 cousins were in, but we had to go under the cover of darkness, so we set our alarms for 3 a.m., and pass out. By 3:15 we all sneak outside, throw on our headlamps and start walking. We know the camera is about a mile away. The trail goes over 2 pretty big hills, and the camera is in a valley on the far side of the second hill. We start walking as normal, and everything is good. The excitement starts building, and we're pretty giddy that we are pulling this glorious prank. After a few minutes of brisk walking we get to the top of the second hill. My older cousin, who knows the area more than me, stops as he gets to the top. As I make my way to the top, I see why. Off in the distance about 400 yards is a spotlight. Its bluish/white color illuminates nearly half of the hill it's pointed at. This thing was crazy bright. By this time all 3 of us were looking at the light, and my older cousin tells us to turn off our headlamps. We stand there in silence. Me, being the 13-year-old I was, started to get freaked out. Aliens is the first thing that comes to my mind, and I tell my oldest cousin we have to leave. I turn on my headlamp and turn around about to head back to the campsite. As soon as I turn my light back on, the super bright blue light starts to slowly turn and stops right on us. No bobbing, or movement from the light besides just a slow, consistent pan right over towards our direction. Just inching, as slowly as possible. At the point I nope out, with my cousins right behind. I get inside, and go straight to bed, pretty much freaking out. Flash forward to next morning, all 3 of us go back to the same spot and then proceeded to go to where we thought the light would have been, and there was nothing there. No boot marks, no light, no nothing. To this day, still have no idea. Was camping on the Appalachian Trail when I was in Boy Scouts. A bear came into camp late at night, came up to my tent, sniffed me through the tent, and decided to lay down on me and snuggle for 5 minutes. He was really warm. I went backpacking into the wilderness alone this summer. Things were uneventful and I intentionally went to a place where people don't tend to go. But just before dark, I heard the voices of 2 men muttering. No matter what I did, I couldn't see them. But I was trying to be discreet myself, so that they didn't see me, a young girl, just chilling in the wilderness completely by myself. Anyway, I never tracked down those voices, and they continued until just after nightfall. I armed myself with my weapons, made my dinner, had a fire, and went to bed. I didn't hear anything again until about 4 a.m. At that time, I began to hear the sound of what I can only describe as a baseball bat or a thick branch being hit up against a tree trunk. It happened over and over again in a distinct pattern, until the sun came up. It came from the same exact spot as where I heard those voices. But again, I never saw anything. The next day I'm telling my coworker about it. He is an avid outdoorsman who writes published work about backpacking in this region. He knows everything about this place. He is a logical, serious man, not prone to fanciful ideas at all. He asked if anything happened, and I told him that. I finished with, "It must have been a deer rubbing its antlers on the trees, right?" He looked me dead in the eyes and told me it sounds like what I heard was Bigfoot tree knocking. He then told me that for decades, he's been told about area sightings and encounters with a Bigfoot type of creature. Here is one account. This happened about a half a mile away from where I was. Great. So it was either two creepy men messing with me, or the New York Bigfoot. Either way, creepy and uncool. Last summer I road tripped across the US solo for 2 months. I left Crater Lake heading to CA later than I'd planned, and was planning to camp wherever. My gas light had been on for 30 miles and there hadn't been any services, so I was getting a little nervous. Saw a sign for a campground and I figured I could talk to whoever was camping there to find out how far away gas was and maybe sleep there for the night. It was an old logging site, so the road there was super rough and very far from the main road. I pulled in and there was a mid-late 20s couple at the very first site. I said hello and asked if they knew the area. I got a sense of genuine friendliness from them and they said the nearest gas station was only 2 miles away, but that it had closed for the night. The site next to them was open and they suggested I take it. I started setting up my tent and was using a rock to get my stakes in the ground when the guy showed up with his hand axe and offered to help. Creepy, but helpful. I asked if he drank and offered him a beer as a neighborly gesture. His wife/girlfriend came over and asked if I had any pills. Just some ibuprofen. But why don't you have some weed I picked up in Washington? They reminded me to pay for my side at the self-serve box. More than once. Red flag, so I said I didn't have cash. They said I could just write my credit card information down and put it in the box. 1,000 red flags. The woman wanted to introduce me to the neighbors, so she took me to an RV that looked like it had been parked there for multiple months. Cardboard over wheels, dirty, and inside were a very drunk man somewhere over 60, a woman who insisted on feeding me the tacos she was cooking, and a dog looking at me like maybe I had food in my pockets. The drunk man started a very long story that wound up being a joke, with the punchline being Jeffrey Dahmer/cannibalism based at the moment the older woman handed me a taco. I stated I had to check on something, got out of the trailer, tossed the taco to the dog following me, and proceeded to crack open a beer to put together a plan. These people were messed up, but I didn't feel like I was in immediate danger. I had some time. I decided to shoot the breeze with the guy from the first couple, and the way he described it, they had been camping for 2 weeks because money ran out. Pretty soon I heard the old woman yelling at the man in the "that's it, I've had it" vein. I'd stated that I was thinking about heading over to that gas station to see if it actually was closed, just so I could get a few more miles done for the day. Old lady comes over to where dude and I are standing and says he's really done it this time. Next ride into town that comes my way, I'm gonna take it. I sip my beer. Younger woman says to me, I can ride with you to the gas station. Just so you find it, I take a much larger sip of my beer. I'm starting to get really uncomfortable. I make up some shit excuse to go back to my site and rip up my tarp, tent, and fly all together, shove it in the back of my car, and get out of there. Made it to the gas station, which was indeed closed, but I'd passed a charming B&B less than a mile before. I explained to the desk clerk that I had a very weird encounter at a campsite and would be sleeping in my car in their lot that night. She wanted to sell me a room far outside my budget and wound up offering the use of their bathrooms and morning coffee. Filled up my tank in the morning and bid farewell to Prospect, Oregon. In the 90s, before everyone had cell phones, my Girl Scout troop was camping in a state park when a terrible storm came through the area, with major flood warnings. The rangers at the park frantically came through every campsite and evacuated everyone to higher ground. Everyone, that is, except us and the Boy Scouts in the site next to us. We went to bed with light rain, but woke in the middle of the night to our tents collapsing from the driving rain and the water quickly rising. The Boy Scouts, they were 12 to 16 years old, we were 7 to 9 years old, helped us quickly pack our site into our cars. Unfortunately, the roads were too dangerous to drive on, because we couldn't see how deep the water was, and we didn't know if any sections of the road had washed out. We abandoned all the vehicles and used the map that the scout leaders had to find someplace that wouldn't be flooded. A few miles away there were treehouse cabins that were built around a tree, and lofted 15 feet in the air. It was decided that we needed to move quickly, and that was our best shot. The older boys and the adults carried the smallest girls when it became clear that the wind was preventing them from staying on their feet. The wind and rain soaked everyone through to the skin. We made it to the cabins, and the adults broke in and raided the emergency supplies there for space blankets. There was no way to build a fire because there was no firewood. It had been an especially dry year and starting campfires was forbidden due to risk of starting a forest fire. I remember shivering for hours, all of us girls in the middle of a huddle on the floor with the boys on the outside trying their best to keep us warm. One of the boys asked us if we knew any Girl Scout songs. Either camp songs are more of a Girl Scout thing than a Boy Scout thing, or they were just humoring us. We sang every song we knew, and the leaders taught us a few more that they had learned. At some point we convinced the boys to sing in rounds with us. Morning came, the rain slowed down to a light drizzle, and a ranger showed up assessing damage to the park. He discovered us, and immediately drove to get help. They returned with a bunch of trucks and all-terrain vehicles, and drove us to a location where doctors were on site to evaluate us. It was sheer luck that none of us had anything worse than the chills. It could have gone worse than it did, and we were unbelievably lucky to have survived it all. We could have easily died in our sleep if the flood had come through all at once instead of slowly rising. If the Boy Scouts hadn't been there, then us small girls could not have made the hike to safety. If we had tried to drive, we would have been washed away. Long one here. But please stick with me. Last year a friend and I went on a long road trip to New Mexico. We camped most of the way, and our first night we got to camp we spent in the Jefferson National Forest at a campsite in West Virginia. We had found some pamphlets for campsites at a gas station and we drove out to a place called White Rocks Campground, which was like a 25+ mile drive up a dirt road into the mountains. We were in the boonies. On our way in we saw no cars except for one truck that was behind us for maybe 15 minutes, but then turned down another road. We passed a huge coal factory with a sign that had said 62 days since an on-site incident. The only people we saw on our drive were standing on the side of the dirt road, huddled around a plastic bin that was on fire. It was all so odd, but we were so excited about camping and being on this trip, we were just laughing about how weird it was instead of not being worried about having A. no cell phone reception or B. being so deep into the mountains. We finally get to the campground and it is completely empty. Not a single car or person to be seen. And this campground had about 30 sites. We drove around all of them trying to spot anyone, but when we realized it was just us we picked a random site and decided to just stick it out. We got out of the car and stood there and just listened. The silence was startling. I love being in the woods. I've never felt scared or intimidated to be out there, but there was such a different feeling this time. There were no bird sounds, it was just thick, silent woods. This was straight up Blair Witch. It was getting dark quick and we decided to start a fire and put up the tent to try to get comfortable. My friend was in charge of the tent and I was putting together the fire. While we were trying to go about our business, we would both stop and listen. My friend even made the point that if anyone was to approach us, at least there were crunchy leaves everywhere for us to hear it coming. See where this might be going? I thought we were just freaking ourselves out, but it really felt like someone was watching us. It was the first time in my life I've understood what that feeling is. I had goosebumps. I wanted to leave, but I kept my cool for my friend. Turned out she was also internally freaking out, but trying to keep it cool as well. Finally the fire is started. Tent is up and sleeping bags ready and the sun had completely set. Sitting around the fire together, the darkness seemed to close in so close to us that it felt suffocating. My friend brought out a book to read aloud and make us feel more comfortable. While she was reading, I grabbed my headlamp and would occasionally turn it on and look around me. I had the feeling since we pulled into the campsite, that someone was out there in those woods. It was pitch black, and our fire was a beacon. My friend and I decided FCKIT let's go to bed. We'll just go to sleep quick, then pack up in the morning and GTFO was our thought process. We put out the fire, and I decided to grab the one knife we had on us that was still in the car, and keep it beside me in the tent. After getting into our sleeping bags, my friend pulls out her cell phone to see if she had any cell reception. Nothing still. She tried to dial her boyfriend just in case, and I remember saying out loud, "We have no reception out here. It won't work." We laid there in silence watching her phone trying to dial out, but it disconnected. And if that was not the perfect cue, suddenly about maybe 20 feet off to the left of our tent, there were footsteps. These weren't footsteps that quietly built up, These were footsteps like someone had been standing behind the tree near our tent and started walking towards us. Those crunchy leaves were doing their job. We froze. Just stared at each other, eyes wide. The footsteps continued to walk towards the tent, then turned to go behind for maybe a couple yards and then they stopped. Silence again. These were heavy-booted footsteps, with the same pattern that would be a person walking, not a bear or a deer. My friend grabbed my knife that was laying by my bag and grabbed her headlamp. She unzips the tent and gets out and stands in front of the tent, knife out, looking around the area. She's a warrior. It was maybe 45 seconds of silence as we listened for more footsteps or voices. I could see the light from my friend's headlamp dashing around the trees, but there was nothing there. She stuck her head back in the tent and said, "We're getting out of here," and then we in record time packed up everything of ours in probably 10 minutes and flew out of there. I'm amazed thinking back on it, how we didn't lose our heads. We kept our cool while packing, but still internally screaming in terror. We only had our headlamps on, and the whole time we were packing up I kept thinking how the hill people would grab us and pull us into the darkness, and we were completely helpless if they did. It didn't feel like it was really happening. Maybe that's why we were almost completely calm while packing, like there's no way this is actually happening on our first night camping. We must just be freaking ourselves out. I still felt like we were being watched. But we sped out of there once done. Now here is where the hill people hunting us was confirmed. As we pulled out of the campsite, there were two black dirty trucks pulled off to the side of the road, hidden in the trees almost but still clearly visible. They had definitely not been there when we pulled in earlier, and the closest residential homes were maybe 15 miles away. We didn't see anyone around them, but we didn't stop to look. We got to a motel and stayed a night there and told the story to the motel owner, who was amazingly sweet and comforting and even gave us some cash even when we left that next morning for us to use for another motel if we needed. I promised that man I would give him a good review. I will remember every detail of that night for the rest of my life. The feeling like we were being watched, hearing the footsteps so close to us suddenly, the black trucks. If anyone out there is a good writer, I would love to have someone put this in writing for me, because I'm a terrible writer, and this post itself is probably awful. My husband and I, when we first got together, went camping in a secluded campground I'd been to with my family multiple times before. We stayed 2 nights and left July 4th. The first night was fine, and we tied our food up into a tree, as we were in bear and wolf country. The next day, we went mussel hunting and came back, fooled around and then took a nap. I woke up to go to the next campground to use the public restroom and found boot prints around our tent that didn't exist before, and bicycle tracks in the dirt, with an imprint of the handlebar which had leaned against my very dirty car. Then, that night, we were woken up to a pack of wolves hunting by our tent, who killed a small animal by our heads. We figured out that there were between 6 to 10 of them, one at each trailhead. We brought a .22 pistol with us just in case, and he shot through the tent to scare them off. They didn't come back, but we didn't sleep much that night. I've been camping all my life and I've never been so spooked on a trip. Camping in my backyard with my friend at about age 12 or 13, about 50 feet from my house, right up against some pretty deep woods, talking to my friend in the tent when we hear something. Then all of a sudden there's an ear-splitting snarling sound right against our tent. It goes on for a few seconds then gets quiet. My friend and I are frozen and freaking out. My friend went hunting once and goes on about how's probably a buck. Definitely a buck, probably about to stick its antler through our tent. Or maybe it's a bear. Oh crap. I hope it's not a bear. We're going to die 50 feet from my own house and no one will know. We devise a plan. One will poke their head out and if it's clear we'll run. I look around, nothing there. We run like crazy into the house where my parents are watching some movie with a black guy driving an old lady around in a taxi. We tell them there was some sort of monster or animal and it was snarling at us. My dad asks, "What did it sound like?" We say, "A deer? An angry deer? Or a bear? Probably a bear. Something scary." My dad says, Did it sound like someone growling down a long PVC pipe, huh, Dad?" When I was young, my mom's boyfriend, his 2 kids, my brother and myself were chilling in lawn chairs looking up at the stars in a big clearing. Mom was already sleeping in the tent trailer. We had seen a few shooting stars, and were pointing out the constellations. Suddenly, we saw this super bright object basically just zoom into view. It stopped kind of in the middle of our sight, way high. It just stopped, like dead stop. And hung there. We all were looking at it and each other to make sure other people were seeing this. It just stayed there for a few moments, and then it took off briefly backwards relative to its trajectory when it came into our view, instantly changed direction after this movement and took off as quickly as it had arrived over the horizon. We were all so freaked out we went straight to bed. Like 8 years ago, my girlfriend and I got some crazy urge to go camping at the Palisades in northern Illinois. We both loved the outdoors and had camped many times before, and this was by far the creepiest shit ever. Started like a normal night, hiked out on a trail for like a half hour, not far but just far enough to be secluded, got camp set up, made a fire. As we cooked/ate dinner we both kind of got this uneasy feeling about staying out and we talked about tearing down the tent and leaving. Something was just making us feel weird. It was dark at this point and we had decided to stay, and almost jokingly she said, "Fine, we'll stay out here in the creep woods and hope there aren't creepy people." And out of the corner of my eye, just within the ring of light from the fire, I saw something move. I jumped up from my seat. It was a man. He froze, almost like he was trying to blend in, then slowly let out a sigh, and backed out of the ring of light, and into the forest. Needless to say, we slept in a locked car. My first time intending to go backcountry camping, we headed to Ojai, and we picked an intentionally unglamorous trail to avoid running into people on the holiday weekend, Labor Day, but still ran into a few more than we'd hoped. Still, after making it 6 miles up the trail, one of the unreserved NFS camping sites looked better than backcountry spots, but as we settled in some dudes showed up and were hovering around our site for a while. There were technically at least 2 sites, so this wasn't really a problem, but the way they were carrying themselves seemed off. They didn't have backpacking packs, just regular JanSport bags, and it didn't seem like enough volume to be carrying supplies to stay the night. It was pretty late, and at least 4 miles either up or down the trail under pretty steep canyon switchbacks to get to a trailhead, but they were just wearing sneakers. They didn't really make conversation and just sat and ate their packed sandwiches, hovered some more, and then asked us if we were planning on staying, which by the half-assembled tent should have been obvious. They eventually collected their things and left as it was getting pretty dark, but they didn't take out any flashlights. Being pretty new to camping and having our own new tent to assemble and food prep to worry about, we were just glad they'd gone up over the ridge and we'd likely be alone for the night. There was a fire pit which helped distract us from the crazy number of flies coming from the nearby stream, and it wasn't that late when we decided to turn in. The 6-mile, much hillier than expected hike combined with flies from the stream made stretching out in the tent quite appealing. Even though it was not much past 9, it was pitch black with the new moon. The weather was nice and clear, no clouds, and we didn't need the rain fly, and thus our Marmot 3P gives you almost totally open view of the sky through the Microtech mesh or whatever it's called. We stared up at the stars and you could see so many more constellations away from LA, a bit of the haze of the Milky Way, and all around it had been a successful last-minute camping trip. But despite being exhausted from the hike, I was having trouble sleeping. An empty feeling stomach from hiking rations, critters rustling the dead grass, and the discovery that my new headlamp gave me vision on the exact location of each and every one of the sparkly eyeballs of the hundreds of spiders sprinkled around the tent were making it hard to fall back asleep. I'd doze off for a bit, then have one of those hyper-realistic, temporal relevant dreams where you think you just woke up and I see somebody pacing the perimeter of our campsite. I freeze, plan my next action, and then a cartoonishly large wild boar barges into the campsite, scares the person away, turns towards me, and I realize it's a dream. Heart racing, it takes me even longer to fall back asleep. I have a couple more dreams. Someone wakes me up to bring me food. Someone found better bug spray. Someone found live ashes in the fire we definitely put out. Then eventually a really long dream, but not from the campsite, and it's about a time I almost got mugged back in my hometown of Baltimore. I start awake again and I'm getting really frustrated. It felt like I hadn't gotten any sleep at all. It was going to be a long hike back, and I had gotten overtired on the way out, and I was legitimately worried about slipping going back down the canyon trails that would be more precarious to pick our way back down with all the gear than they had been to hike up. My BF was asleep, and had been adamant about not taking 100 pictures and being present in the moment, which I get, but I snuck out my phone, just checked the time. Took forever to power back on, no signal, not surprising, and it's not even 11. I'm both relieved to have plenty of time to sleep and annoyed that after struggling to sleep through so many dreams it's so early. I toss and turn some more and eventually just settle in and stare at the new stars coming up over the ridge. I doze off again. Who knows how long later I wake up to a loud metal click. It's impossibly bright, but not morning. Up on the ridge there's a bright white torch that's illuminating my whole tent. Boyfriend is still asleep. I freeze and assess. No one moves and I hold in place long enough to be sure it's not a dream. Someone is definitely standing on the ridge shining a daylight-style flashlight on us. I question the critter rustling, and the dreams about the people moving around the camp. I try to wake my boyfriend quietly so we can decide what to do, and as soon as he's half awake he starts against the bright light. I manage to shush him before he gets louder and we commence to whispering about what's going on and what to do. Is it those guys? I check my phone, no signal, and it's not even midnight. They could definitely just be on the way back? But why so late? Why just stand there shining their light on our tent, blinding us, creating this massive 5-pointed star-type lens flare-type effect through the tech fabric? Eventually we decide the only thing we can do to break the standoff is get out of the tent and show them we're awake. Maybe they'll move along like last time, or at least we won't be ambushed trapped inside the tiny tent and we'll be able to run. My boyfriend grabs the shovel/mallet tool, now combination shit shoveling, tent construction, drifter attacking implement, and I put on my shoes. We quietly unzip the tent and as the flap pushes back the light starts shimmering, then the flare disappears. It is replaced by the moon. Turns out it wasn't a new moon. We just gone to sleep so early it hadn't risen yet, and we were so close to the base of the ridge and under a live oak canopy that reduced visibility of what would have been very high contrast moon shadows. The moon was full and was staggeringly bright, and it would have been obvious it was the moon, but the new tech fabric of the tent resembled a dragonfly eye. It's green/gold/orange and changes color depending on the direction you look at it from. We laughed, went back to sleep. I still had a crappy night's sleep, but the remainder of the trip was uneventful. Packing up to leave, I saw that my phone that I'd pulled out was totally in the path of the sleeping bag zipper, and next to my ear could easily have been the loud click waking me up as I rolled over. The same tent has served us well in Joshua Tree, but now I know to disregard the distortions of the tent fabric and do my high-fidelity stargazing before turning in for the night. Not my story, but a friend of mine was camping once and decided to take a hike. He ended up walking way out into the middle of nowhere, and was miles from any known human population when he heard something. He decided to investigate, and when he got close enough, he could hear the Lion King Circle of Life playing. He promptly noped right out of there. Growing up in one of the biggest cities in the US didn't give me many opportunities for outdoor recreation, and once we moved to the Pacific Northwest I didn't have much interest. I quickly learned to love hiking and canoeing, but camping didn't interest me at all. Bugs and bears and boredom. The first and last time my significant other convinced me to try camping only lasted a few hours. We set up the tent, I got wrapped up in reading, and he went for a hike. He has some ongoing digestive issues and a couple of miles away felt nature's call. He walked off the trail into the trees to take care of business. He came thrashing back into the campsite red-faced and in a little bit of shock. The first words out of his mouth were, "Is there DNA in poop? I just pooped on a crime scene." To clarify, he pooped on a shallow grave. Or near a shallow grave. Stand By Me was a decent movie, but I wasn't tromping back to see for myself. This was just before everyone took phones everywhere, so we drove back to the nearest town to call authorities. The police asked us to clear out and I packed up while he went to show the detectives where. We found out later that it was a drug deal gone sour and two others killed a lady and buried her in the woods. I still love outdoor activities, but I haven't gone camping again. I was camping with a toddler. She was very grumpy. We go for a hike with her screaming the whole way, and finally decide to just turn back. She runs ahead and I run and grab her. Right when I pick her up, a black bear runs across our path about 10 feet away from us. My heart drops and we quickly make our way back, this time encouraging the darling's screams. I have only camped once in my life, and at nighttime I heard a bear snarl from about 50 feet away from the tent I was in. It scared me a lot. A bear started swiping my tent. I didn't know what was happening, so I got up and screamed at it. At 2 a.m., my tent was surrounded by a pack of coyotes. No idea why all my food was up in a tree, at least an eighth of a mile away. They were howling, and just kept walking around in circles. I had to step out of the tent, make noise, and start the fire back up to drive them off. Then they came back at like 5 a.m. Frown. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.